And I don't know if you have any insight into that, either through your journey or through people you know, and just give insight and how that is for a woman cyclist and what we maybe as a community need to do about those sorts of things.
I think women will bring in women, and as it grows, it'll grow exponentially. Um, but how do we get there? I mean, I look back at my own experience in beginning cycling in my early 20s, and the people around me were all middle-aged men.
Hmm.
They were very nice and very respectful, teaching me how to group ride, encouraging me to race. But I didn't know any other women. I went through most of my 20s. It wasn't until I really started racing, got a coach that I remember having another female to train and race with, and I was like, wow, totally different. This is great. And it didn't change a lot day to day, but it was just nice to have different conversation, I think. So going back, women will bring women to the sport. And that comes from the community level. That comes from, local group rides. I always commend areas that do all female rides. I'm in Indianapolis. I have to give a shout out to the Divas program. We have a great program here, and they have every ability covered, from very beginner to more experienced with different distances. But it's all women, and I'm on a group chat with them, and it's just amazing. It just opens up the dialogue, and those are the type of initiatives we need to just get women comfortable with riding bike, being in that community of other people who they can enjoy the sport with, and they don't have to race.
Hmm. Exactly.
It's fitness. Like I said, I spent a decade of my life just riding for my own mental sanity and fitness.
Hmm.
And it wasn't until later I'm like, oh well, I'm going to race and I'm going to commit to this. But just for fitness, getting that community out, it comes from the community level. It comes from leaders in the community level that take charge, and lead the way. Um, even on the group rides, I think there's a level of responsibility. If you're that token woman on a group ride, and there's another woman on the ride, you go say hi. You just make her feel welcomed. It's those little things, and I think of the group rides I've done where it's all men, and there's that one other token strong woman who's just like,
Hmm.
hi, I'm so and so. Like, what's your name? And it can be as simple as that.
Well, that's great advice, or is great insight. So you saying all that, I have a question. Do you see yourself as a role model for women, that whether it's girls, young women, or even like you mentioned, older women getting into cycling? I mean, do you see yourself as a role model, and how do you like, I don't know, how do you deal with that? Because you kind of said that with Butcher Box, it kind of exceeded your expectations. That was in 2022. We're sitting here, it's not even the end of 2023, but you're on a big platform now, like, at least in the cycling world. I mean, do you see yourself that way, and how do you try to utilize that, if you do see yourself as a role model?
I love that question because I'm in a transition point within myself that, like I said earlier, I'm trying to figure out what I can leave for this sport, what I can do.
Hmm.
I think all athletes, we always want to prove something. We're hyper competitive, at least at this top level racing part. And we want to prove that we're good. We want other people to know you're good. We want other people to, introduce yourself, introduce them, be introduced with all these accolades.
Hmm.
But once you get to that point, and then what? Um, that kind of glory fades very quickly. So I feel privileged that I've reached a point very quickly that people know my name now, and what am I going to do about that? I'm a little bit older in this career trajectory as a professional athlete, so unfortunately, a few ships have sailed. Uh, I can cry about later, but I can still make an impact in the sport. So, when you talk about mentoring, I'm trying to navigate those waters better now, and making myself more available, even if it's a conversation or encouragement for younger riders coming up, or even an older rider who still wants to race. How do you just be a positive voice in that environment?
Boy, I love
So,
your mindset. I love your mindset. I just got to comment and commend you on that. I have a young daughter who's hyper athletic, and I would love to see her in road racing and biking, and she does have an affinity towards it. Um,
I don't know
but I
why
just
you
don't.
never ride your bike, but
I know. Yes, I want her. I'm giving her a chance to, enter into a level playing field with me.
yeah.
Um, but no, I really want to cultivate that interest, and I'll tell you, she's, for a multitude of reasons, whether she's intimidated, whether she, has different priorities or interests at the time. It's just, I think that there's women out there that could, inspire her to really grasp hold of the sport. And I'll tell you, I'm gonna tell her that we've had this conversation. I'm gonna encourage her to listen to this podcast episode. If any of them, this is really important because I think your mindset and the legacy and the imprint that you're trying to leave on the sport is exactly where I think women like you should be. It's tremendous, and I again commend you. Not that you're looking for accolades. I know you're not, but I mean it's a really inspiring mindset that you have. I'm just curious, if I may, I just want to ask one question.
hmm
What was your introduction into biking? Like, how did you get traction into the interest of cycling of all sports that you probably could have done as a young youth or adult?
I was a soccer player throughout high school and college, and I had a she was an Ironman, and I
hmm
already looked up to her as an athlete and a person. And hey, borrow my bike and do this 50-mile ride. I think you would really like it. And I was just like, okay, sure. And I started riding. Just the kind of the mental like toughness it took. Um,
hmm
like a t-shirt and some hybrid bike and riding 50 miles with no training when you're 16 or 17. I was like, this is awesome. And I was doing it for fitness for my other sports, and it was purely just out of fun. I just enjoyed um, you know early on, I would the people around me who were riding were all my friends' parents. No one my age was riding where I grew up. So I would come over and be like, hey, I'm here to ride with your mom or hang out with um, and that just grew. Eventually, I lived in an area that had group rides, and people just taught me the etiquette of group riding. It was just that natural growth, and I've always had a competitive spirit. Just being an athlete and a bunch of other sports, so it came naturally that I just wanted to. I want to do this, and I want to do it well. That kind of came naturally, but I didn't have much in terms of female mentorship throughout my own path. It was other people, which I'm very grateful for, those other people, but they were men. So,
hmm
their advice was helpful, but their advice for the trajectory in the sport was probably different.
Yeah, and you obviously are a driven person. Obviously, we established that at the beginning of the podcast. But I feel like not everyone is going to be driven in the same way, even if they might have the same talent, but they might not have the same drive. So it's possible that someone like you, like a young Andrea somewhere else, that's in that environment with all men, it might be that they don't persevere the same way you did, and it might be that if they had more women as mentors at an earlier age, that would contribute to closing that gap between the 15% women that you mentioned that are registered as USA Cycling versus the 85% men. And I think that's a good point that, like I said, I wouldn't have thought of. I think that's a good insight that you bring to the table here.
And it might be a very slight tipping point too, because we do things with our friends, and let's say
Mm-hmm.
or you're enjoying it, but it's like you don't have those close friends around you.
Yep.
That might just be the tipping point of you committing further to a sport. Um, if you just have a group around you that go ride our bike.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, I think the female mentorship that you suggested is it really resonates with me because listening to your story and kind of, reflecting back on the fact that you had a bunch of men mentors or folks that probably kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies thinking of my daughter in that same, but that's the times, right? 15, like as we suggested, there's a dearth of female athletes that cycle. And so, I think again, having a female presence in the sport is so compelling to give young athletes that inspiration to do something more with the sport. It certainly resonates with me. And again, I think that, all the reason why we're having this conversation is to inspire more young athletes to get into sports, both male and female, but specifically female.
Yeah, I mean, we can inspire guys, so we need someone
Yeah.
else to help us understand what it's going to take, for women as well. Because, like I said, I really, really believe that getting more people into cycling is important. And like you said, it seems like there's more men already into cycling than women, which means we should be focusing on efforts in getting women into cycling. Because it'd be better for me, even not even I'm a guy, but it'll be better for me if there's more people riding a bike. So yeah, we definitely appreciate that.
But what I'm interested in knowing too, I feel like a lot of the women who are in the sport, they got into it because their partner does it or their father was
Mm-hmm.
cyclist or some kind of family connection. How many women grew in the sport organically without
Mm-hmm.
a direct branch? Because that's kind of how I felt, that I didn't have a direct branch and I had to find my way throughout,
Yeah.
All
which
the
I think
more interesting. Yeah. All the more interesting.
challenging. And I think we're missing those people. I think we lose them. I think there's interest and we lose those.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
How do we keep them enthusiastic about the sport and want to even just ride?
That's a great point. And I will say one of the things I'm going to take away from that is that we, in our little community, we have our kind of like a little cycling group, and we post a lot of rides, and I post a lot of rides, and I'm always inviting people, and I try to be open about everybody. We have a ride every Friday morning that's our donut ride, so it's like no stress, anyone can come. But now that you say that, I'm going to work with some people in our community to encourage some people to have women only rides, because I bet you there's some women out in our community that don't even want to come to the donut ride because they're just like, I'm not sure I even want to go if there's going to be guys there. But if it was an all women ride, there might be a chance that there's new riders that might come into it. So at least that's an action I'm going to take away now that I've heard some of the things you're saying and some of the insights you're providing that I didn't have in the past. So not that it's going to change the world, but if a bunch of people do similar things, maybe we, like you said, we start to make a little bit of progress and then create momentum and get where we want to be. So I did
You
have a
have a
different. Well, go ahead.
Oh,
What?
sorry. You had a diva group in Indianapolis you referenced. Is that basically what that is? As a structure that we may be able to model up against, if we encourage more women only rides?
hmm So that is a program that's been spearheaded by Jennifer over here. She runs the Indianapolis criterium race we have, and she's modeled it after actually what they're doing down in Tulsa. Um,
Mm-hmm.
have an all women's divas ride, and I've been on a couple rides with them, and I'm just blown away by how many women are out just riding their bike. And um, a lot of them don't have aspirations to race, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
There's a wide spectrum again of where they are at in the sport, and they have different, like I said, different distances with different times during the week. And there's ride leaders who are a little bit more veterans of the sport, who just make it a very welcoming place for women to ride, even brand new to the sport, which I think is the most intimidating time to get in.
Right. Yeah, that's great. We'll have to do that, Randy. Well,
For
not
sure.
us. We won't do it, of course, but we'll try to help get something like that started. But we definitely have some, very enthusiastic, charismatic female riders in our area that we can, lean on them, see if they can help move that along. That'd be fantastic. But I did want to ask you something else. I feel like, there could be parallels here in physiatry. I don't know. I haven't really looked this up, but Randy sort of mentioned it's probably that there's less women physiatrists than there are men. There's definitely less women physicians than there are men. And do you see any parallels where there's, in your professional career, as there's less women and that has similar challenges? And then B, do you also see yourself as a role model in your professional career versus just your cycling career? And can you relate those two things to help, does one help you with the other or vice versa?
There's a lot of tough questions in that. My specialty, as you said, is physiatry. It's not very well known, but it is a doctor. So if you've ever known anyone to do an rehab stay in a hospital, they have a doctor, and that's the type of doctor I am. So it can be brain injury rehab, stroke, spinal cord rehab. That's kind of the bread and butter of what I trained in. I further specialize in sports medicine, fellowship in that. So in terms of women are in my specialty, in the core specialty of physiatry, I think it's pretty close to 50-50.
Okay.
Really nice to see. And, the last couple decades, medical schools and residency programs, they've been really attuned to making the numbers more equal, knowing that there's got to be good representation among the medical field, especially physicians. But I will say, looking at the sports medicine subspecialty, which is really where my training
Yep.
developed into, that is more male dominated, as you would naturally expect with being a sports doctor. I will say when I was working in Chicago, I was part of an orthopedic group, and I was one of maybe two, but I think I was the only female physician in the orthopedic department. I think the other one was more of a adjunct faculty, but that was starking. That was that can't happen. Being the only physician in a department, they knew that, and they were working on that too. But that's just because the orthopedic groups, those are heavily male dominated. So it's interesting navigating those waters on a professional side, because there is a lot of overlap to interactions or how you think about things or the things you advocate for that overlap with professional sport. And I think this is how I've been able to use my voice with things I care about. And this is something I care about, on how do you get good female representation. And I talk about it in the sport, but I also talk about it professionally too. But, those are more one-on-one conversations, any kind of big platforms. But they both matter a lot. In terms of being a role model, I am still very early in my career. I just graduated my fellowship a year ago. So I'm still a little bit in this mode of I'm looking up to other people. I'm still in a mode of I'm the mentee and other me. But then I can't forget that you can always be a mentor. So I think I don't consider myself a mentor quite yet in that setting, because I probably haven't been in one place long enough to develop those types of relationships. If anything, I hope I'm a role model into just being, a professional woman, doing a passion, and I've become more aware of that, I think, people are watching how I do things, and just being aware of that and making myself more available is something that I'm actively working on.
Well, that you saying that, do you think either in your professional career or even in the cycling, does that put more pressure on you than I would have if I was a physiatrist or if I was a professional bike racer, because you have this added responsibility that people are looking at you in that sort of way? And does that help you or hurt you, or I would be super interested to hear your perspective on that.
I think it comes down to be a good person, be respectful. I you know it's hard for me to say if I change what I do or say. I try to be within all my roles in life. I like to, honestly, I like to link them when I can. So I have the realization that people in my professional life, medical side, are somewhat paying attention to me on a sports side,
Okay.
be congruent in my actions or attitudes. Um, but I mean that should come naturally, and I think it does if I'm just being authentic to who I am. And this is where I was talking about, I surround myself with communities that care about me as a person and care about what I do. Um,
Mm-hmm.
not it's not a task to be congruent with my different roles.
Right.
If
Well,
that
and I'll jump in and kind of just taking a different perspective of, or looking at it through my lens of what your comments were. You know, when you sit there and you say that you're an expert in one field and a novice in another, you know, it's really hard to turn those switches off when you sit there and say, hey, you know what, I am an expert in professional cycling, you know, but you're humble enough to say, I'm a novice here and I know I need to continue not to over leverage that aspect. Like, hey, I'm a pro athlete, you know, I can have a chip on my shoulder, I'm overly confident and those type of things. But no, you're sitting there and saying, hey, you know what, I'm a pro athlete, but you know, I'm also new to this career and I want to grow and develop and learn, you know, from those that can teach me. And so, you know, taking that approach is also, you know, something that I think will take you very far. But I will say, and I've been now in healthcare administration for a long time. I do have a clinical background, not quite like yours, but I do have a clinical background. I will say the best relationship conversations that I've had with doctors over my career have nothing to do with medicine, have everything to do with some things that are happening outside, whether it's an extracurricular activity or interest that we share, right? And so I think that that's a platform that I think in your professional medical career will take you a long way in building those very valid and important relationships that you have with your peers and colleagues.
I think that's spot on. I think me being a doctor makes me more human to the cycling world because I have this career, and then
Hmm.
my career being a cyclist and having this passion makes me more human. So they really have a symbiotic relationship
Yeah, they do.
where you
They're
just
very.
are able to connect with people on a different level. I mean, I even had patients, you know, they're here, they're seeing me for their ailments and they're asking me questions about my racing, and I move it along. No, no, no. Tell me about your knee. We're not about that human connection that I'm fostering that whole time.
Well, doctor, if we have time after the podcast, I did crash my bike last week and my thumb kind of. That is a true
Yeah,
story, but
that
I'm
is
okay.
true but sad story. But
Yeah.
yeah. But you know, earlier on, like you just mentioned about you being in you know, you have your professional side and the cycling side. But earlier on you did mention, and I also know this, that there are quite a few professionals in the women's peloton in the US that, you know, are doing various things like you mentioned. And you know, it's always really cool when you're listening to the race, if you're on a like if you're listening to a stream on TV and the announcers are talking about it and they'll mention the rider, like, oh yeah, this person is a psychologist or this person is a lawyer or whatever, like you were saying. And it may be I might not notice it as much, but I feel like they don't say those things as much in the men's side when they're during the race. And I'm curious, is that partly because there's such a disparity that the women are more need to be have a career and can't just be a professional racer, and that sort of by necessity you have that level of professionalism within the peloton?
So you're touching upon exactly what I'm torn about. 22. Whereas on one side you want to celebrate how successful
Yep.
these female racers are, but on the other hand, you ask, well, why do they need to be at that point?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Why are they reaching this part of the sport in their mid 30s after they've attained a PhD or whatever?
Yep.
Can't be 21 years old chasing the dream. Why not? Um, and I think that comes from opportunity. That comes, especially, I hate to say it, paid opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to give money such a platform, but if there's less positions for the female athletes to have a paid opportunity, they're not going to pursue the sport 100%, even if they have world-class talent. At some point, I mean, most of us have bills to pay. It's the hard thing we talk openly enough about. which is why even early on I was pretty vocal about NCL giving good livable salary to the
Mm-hmm.
because that's it was unheard of for a while in the female peloton, and I think it's getting better. And a lot of it's probably the push on the world tour level. Um,
Yeah.
even them, I mean, even they are still trying to push to be very near the men, but these changes trickle down. Um, I think it is improving, but I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, for sure. And we talked about this in one of our previous podcasts. That it just to tell the short story of it is that the Specialized released a new bike, and they released it for the world champion, the new SL8, the new tarmac. They released it for the world championships, and Remco was riding that. And it was obviously ready like 2 weeks earlier during the Tour de France Femme, and Remco didn't do crap no, everyone knew he wasn't going to do anything in the world championship because it wasn't a course for him. And we were talking about like, why didn't Specialized see that they could have released this during the Tour de France Femme, because their riders the Specialized riders dominated the Tour de France, and they would have had such an incredible marketing opportunity. But for whatever reason, I feel like they just missed the boat there and didn't release that new bike for the Tour de France Femme, which got incredible ratings. And for whatever reason, we're still in this position where people don't see women's racing as valuable or whatever, as entertaining, which is like, people that watch racing, if they're not watching the women's racing, I mean, that's just, sad for them, because they're just missing out on such a good product. And I wonder if there's something that, like you said, like if it does trickle down, like if it gets from the World Tour, and that is, if you're saying that is somehow trickling down and helping on the domestic scene, you know, hopefully the NCL or other things we can do can help get people to understand how exciting women's racing can be. So if you get more fans, you get more money, you get more everything, and that can grow the whole thing too. I mean, I don't know. I'd be interested to hear what you think about that too. Is like, do you ever sit around and think like, well, why aren't more people watching women's racing? It's so exciting. Obviously, you think it's exciting from inside, but I think it's exciting from outside too.
And this is looking at a bigger question of women's sports and all
Mm-hmm.
as that are questioning this and trying to figure it out. And a lot of it comes down to media exposure. How do you get it? How do you make it profitable? The numbers are improving in terms of the return for showing women's sports. And even just in the last decade, your ability to actually watch a women's race has gotten a lot easier. I remember getting into the sport.
Mm-hmm.
I had nothing to follow. I mean, this was the Lance Armstrong era.
Yep.
Like, I had a poster of him on my wall, like, because that's all there was. I couldn't even name a female cyclist, even though
Yeah.
it was probably like the prime person to get into the sport because I had that early peaked interest. It's just the exposure was not there. But I mean, that takes time, that takes money, that takes a lot of smart people
Mm-hmm.
making decisions, but it has to be the right people. On your comment for the bike, it's like someone just made that decision. That was
Yep.
a decision. And depending what they value or prioritize, it, releasing that bike earlier was just probably not even a thought.
Exactly. Which I think is silly, but you just mentioned something, and I want to ask you a question about it. Like, you're right. During the Lance era, I couldn't even name a female cyclist from that era either. Obviously, I can name female cyclists now, and I think that's great, and hopefully that's progress, and hopefully that means that 10, 15 years from now, that contributes to something. But I would not be able to answer this. I would not be able to say anything like this. So I would like to hear your perspective. If the 14, 15-year-old Andrea would have had a female professional cyclist to look up to, what would that have meant to you?
To have that role model in that sport would have probably committed me earlier rather than committing to the sport when I was 30 years old. It's something I could have committed to when I was 20. Finding how to find the right opportunities. Uh, what I what I realized, a lot of this is just word of mouth. Um,
Mm-hmm.
whole application. Like I'm an application person. That's how I got to med school. That's how I've gotten where I am. But a lot of times, at least then, there was no application process. I think things are a little bit better on the women's side where teams are having tryouts and they're accepting resumes from across the board and they're opening up that ability. But at 14-year-old me, um, I may have just pursued the sport earlier, and who knows what my trajectory would have been if I had committed to this in my 20s.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you are already, after a few years of doing this since you turned 30, are a superstar. So yeah, you could have been, I mean, obviously it's hard to say could have been because you're already at such a level. But it's just one of those things that, like we talked about before, how many people are we missing that could be getting into it? Maybe they're not going to become like you, but maybe they're just going to become, competitive racers, like good racers, or even just people riding their bikes that we're missing.
Mhm.
And, hopefully that's something that's going to change.
I mean, you look at the running culture, and a lot of people for fitness, for fun,
Yep.
they'll hop in a marathon or two. I mean, not everyone, but it might even just be a 5K. But there's a whole community of people who do this because they love it and they have running groups. So there's no reason cycling can't be the same in my mind. There's more doors to go through to get in this,
Mm-hmm.
the cost of equipment and developing the skills of bike handling and bike riding. But you can still do this for fun, and there's plenty of events that happen. You go ride from point A to point B. It's a sponsored event. It doesn't have to be just racing.